Welcome, career thought leaders. We're excited to see you here again today. And we have Emily Wong with us today, who is one of our graders for the Academy Certified Resume Writer Program. And Emily, you've been grading with us for a couple of years now?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. 2 or 3 years at least.
Okay. So
Yeah.
you mainly review one project, which is our first writing project for the students. And I've got to say that I love your style because you always do a good job of balancing the positive and the improvements that the writers can make. And we always give a ton of feedback on that first homework assignment with anyone, even our experienced writers. But today we're going to be talking about some of the themes that we've seen and some of the lessons that we can share with writers from grading. I feel like it's been hundreds, hundreds of
Yeah.
resumes. And things that they can learn. But of course, those of you out there in the audience, please do jump in and share what you're seeing, and we'll share your comments and talk through those as well. So let's dive in here and talk about kind of a contentious issue on strategy and resume strategy and helping someone change industries. So we do this in a few of our projects, and because it's a strategic point, we love to help writers think about how will you help someone that wants to change industries. So when you look at a resume and they're trying to help one of these clients change industries, what is it that you would recommend for a writer?
Well, I think the first thing is that when when I'm working with my clients, we will dive deep into all those skills and those achievements that will carry over. So if you're moving from, say, high tech to consumer product goods, or high tech, I should say business to business to consumer product goods, there's still those elements that are still important. It's those partnerships that you're building, market share still matters, growth still matters, scalability, all those things still matter. So really focusing in on those things and not putting so much emphasis on the company or the product. Some products, like say if you I came from Nintendo, so if you're talking about a product that everybody knows, like the Wii, that's a kind of a feather in your cap, and it also, people want to have a conversation about that sometimes. But if you're talking about something that's esoteric, that's not something that you want to be talking about, especially in that top part. Um, yeah, so that, and then you also want to be really careful about acronyms, and so you just want to make sure you're popping, you got the good title and those transferable skills at the top.
Yeah, and we find that sometimes people get bogged down into the product names, and I find it overshadows the accomplishments, because now instead of talking about the person's sales and leadership accomplishments, we're really so bogged down in the product names that we see the person as being, an insurance industry person instead of a salesperson. So
Yeah,
there's a fine balance there, right?
right, exactly.
And we don't want to misrepresent their story, but we're always thinking about the audience. And like you said, if it's something everyone will recognize, like the we, it might be a fun story. But if it's a product name that either pigeonholes them in an old industry, an industry they want to leave, or something, it may not do their best work. Now, so one of the things that you mentioned was this idea of the title or the headline. And how do you help people transition with that headline?
So I think people get really bogged down into what they're doing now, and a lot of our clients are very honest, and they don't want to represent themselves. When students are also taking your classes, they will tend to, okay, if the title of that person is, so for example, regional sales manager, that's what they'll put as the title. But that there's space up there to expand, and if that person is, so we have one of our fictitious candidates is a regional manager, but aspires to be a national account manager or national leader. She can put something in there like nationally recognized turnaround expert, or just, that will really make it pop, and that's going to make the reader say, okay, so I want to learn more about this person and how she accomplished that.
Yeah, so there's this middle ground between talking about who they are, and we don't have to use their exact title up there as the headline on the document, and making that a little bit broader could help them expand in their career.
Exactly.
And when we think about doing that, one of the other pieces that you've mentioned is this kind of top of the fold piece. And you must have seen at least 100 resumes for this same exact case study. What makes one resume immediately where you think this person gets it?
It's when they use those words with a punch, and they use maybe maximum 2 lines per bullet. So they might have, so I look at it as 2 kinds of buckets to use. One is the highlights of major achievements bucket, and the other, so the data points, and another bucket is more the value proposition. And so often I will have bullets of the value propositions. What are the things that they bring? Do they grow market share? Are they continually scaling for growth? Do they build teams where 50% of their team members are being positioned for promotions, that kind of thing. And then, so that's kind of their value proposition. And then on the other side of it are the numericals, the 50% growth, or that kind of share growth and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and so the students that share those up at the top, then we see, they're really getting that highlight. This is how you highlight someone. And I know a lot of us are doing that in our resumes. And I've seen lately that there's still some room for growth for all of us to make sure that that top part of the resume really pops. And we're going to look at an example of that here in just a minute. But the other piece of it that we were talking about right before we jumped on was this idea of the skills that you choose to list up there when you make a skills list.
Right. So I don't even use the tables anymore. I think the tables are a nice way to organize the skills, but it ends up taking up way too much space. We don't have the real estate for that. So listing those skills and then separating them maybe with a symbol, like a little square or something like that, so they're separated. But then you can get that to 3 lines versus this big box in the middle of the page, which isn't necessary. Obviously, you need those terms in there as keywords, but you shouldn't be taking up that much space. And another thing that when I'm working with my executive clients, that I notice that they're still putting things like project management in there, and communication skills. And those are the things that, they're a given. And honestly, a VP should not be managing projects anyway, right? And so those are the things that we really want to make sure we're pruning those things away.
Yeah, and thinking about if that is in the job description, is it something we really want to highlight in a skills list, or is it going to be in the context of our document? And making those choices is one of the things that we're doing, and less space on a skills list today because it isn't differentiating. It's something that everybody's going to have on their document. So Linda was just sharing that she just started the program, and even after 30 years learning new things, which I love. I learn new things. I think that's part of why you like to grade, is that we learn new things every time we're grading as well. And then cutting down the space on the skills section really does make a difference. So one of the other sticky situations that we come up across here is the communication of negative experiences. So Meredith, our case study, she's turned around departments, but what we see sometimes is a little bit of overemphasis on the negative.
Right. Yeah, that's something that I really emphasize when I'm grading, because sometimes I see things, something like the region started out in, what is it, number 72, 70, whatever it is, right? Some terrible number. They're starting the sentence that way. And you can still communicate that. Sometimes you need to communicate what that is, but in a very subtle way. I mean, you can use one word. The rest of it really needs to be focused on that turnaround. And you can say turned around by da 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 from, some people say from dead last, and that's okay. But it's tucked away at the end of the sentence. That's what's important, I think.
Yeah, and then minimize the negative and then emphasize the turnaround and the success. And we need that context sometimes of the negative, but if we overdo it, and you write this in the comments sometimes, like you drug the whole resume down to this very negative place, and we don't want to do that. When we're telling the story, there's a subtlety to telling that challenge.
And do you mind if I just add one more thing, Marie, that we didn't talk about this earlier, but sometimes I notice that people bring up the old sales numbers. You don't need to do that. So if somebody has reached 27 million from 19 million, you don't need to mention the 19 million. Say you can use the percentage increase or the amount increase and the achievement of what that final number is, but don't lower the quality or the story by bringing up that old number. It really isn't necessary.
Interesting. Yeah, and we can share that graphically, perhaps, with some of our clients or some of the students step out and do a graph on that first resume, which is always fun to see. But then the other thing, and I just saw this in a resume the other day for one of our other programs, someone wrote underperforming predecessor. And I really hesitate or would recommend that you not refer to a person. So if you're going to say underperforming, it was the territory, it was the region, something that is kind of one step away from the person. When I read that underperforming predecessor, I thought, oh, no one's going to want to hire that person because they don't want someone talking bad about other people. Talking bad about a situation or a performance is something different than talking bad about a person.
Right, absolutely. And then on the flip side of that, Marie, is you want to make sure that the reader understands, and maybe they will understand if they're looking at the date range of when that person worked there, but it's really important that they understand that it was dead last before you were there. But don't say anything about the predecessor.
Yes, yeah, the context is important, and being clear about that it was, before I took over. We see that sometimes where that part is a little bit of a challenge. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen here, and we're going to talk a little bit about some specifics and a little bit more in the details here about things that we see. So this is one of the other challenges that I'm seeing in a lot of different resumes right now, which is this difference between, well, let's start up here. We'll start with the be verbs, because you and I were just talking about some of these examples that use, and it's not necessarily wrong, but when you use a be verb, it's often an indicator that you could write tighter, shorter, crisper, cleaner. So I'll always look at a sentence with a was, were, be, are, being, and just say, okay, there's probably a cleaner way to say that, because that word is telling me that I'm going around the circle. When I'm using that word, it usually means I'm not being direct with what I'm saying.
Yeah. I feel like the to be verb, it saps the resume of energy. And just turning it around, as you said, like even if you're saying, what would be an example? The use of, so leads, what would be an example? I don't have one off the top of my head, but you can get rid of by switching around the words, as you're saying here.
Yeah, that's one of my other favorite things to teach is the paramedic method, which has you identify those prepositions and flip them. But we're not going to go into that detail today. The other thing, and you are so cute because you say that when people do this, you get all defensive for Meredith, who is the fake client, because you don't give your candidate you don't give them the credit when you write in this passive voice.
Right. So I notice one of the things is, so the parallel structure, first of all, is really important because you don't, when a reader is reading, they're expecting things to be written, even if it's subconscious, it's in their mind's eye that they expect things to be written in a parallel structure. So it's jarring to say she increased da 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 da, she exploded da 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 da, and then it says 10 President's Club wins for her team. So one is that it's jarring because it's interrupting that flow. But the other thing is that we want to give her credit. So she led that team to those wins, right? So just say led, or you can use another word, but basically put a verb in there to give her credit for that. And then another one is she had some students, I'm sorry, she had some of her direct reports were promoted. So you don't want to say they were promoted because that's the to be, but you can say she positioned them for promotions.
Right.
And that,
Developed. Yeah, lots of words there. I mean, I always think like this is magic. Magically, the sales increased. Magically, the profit grew. Right. And the person just happened to be there when this happened. And that's not the picture that we want to give. We want to be clear that what their role was. And if it was led or managed or, whatever their role was, you can use the right verb. But when we do this passive voice, it just takes them out of the actor seat and they're almost there kind of having things happen to them. So we want to avoid that. So here's one of the biggest confusions I am seeing right now. And you might think, oh, it's not a huge deal, but it does make the resume look antiquated when we use this third person voice. So third person is he or she cultivates. The first person is I cultivate or I cultivated or managed or led or whatever. So it's that present tense or past tense verb. When we start using the S, it moves into that third person voice. So as we were talking about this, you said one of those things that we might write is leader who manages. And that looks third person, but it actually isn't, because the full sentence would be, I am a leader who. And we want to be careful with these types of phrases because they in themselves are a little, if we overuse them, it can feel outdated. But you can have one lead in that is some descriptor that is pertinent to your client. So be careful of those overused words. But you could have one lead in that starts with this, I'm a leader who manages teams, blah, blah, blah. But then the next sentence will start with a present tense verb, over deliver. I don't know what that might be, but you don't have to keep the S just because you used an S in that first sentence. So that's one of the challenges that I'm seeing people have. And when they keep using that S, it gets into that third person voice and it just looks and sounds antiquated. So be careful of overusing the descriptors. And then when you do dive into the verbs, make sure they're first person.
right. And to get away from those things like adept at, skilled at, with a track record of, you can say known for. I don't think that's overused. Do you, Marie?
So I like to so usually if it's adept at managing, why not just say manage? So most of the time I just cut them out. Occasionally I'll use consistently or repeatedly, because that can show kind of that track record without saying the word track record. Known for can definitely work. You just want to be careful about how much you're using that. And this is one thing. So we have one program where people submit resumes. So our master resume writer, people submit resumes. And in those 5 resumes, sometimes I'll see the same phrase in the summary for almost every person. And that's an indicator to me as a writer that it's time for me to get rid of that phrase. So if I use known for in 3 out of 5 resumes, it's time for me to just retire that phrase for a while. And I've just gotten too used to that. And I'm not really thinking about what is pertinent and branded for this client.
Yeah. Good
So
point.
I'd recommend just going back and look at your last 5 resumes and see if there's phrases that you use too frequently.
Right.
It's time
Yeah.
to write that down and say, okay, I'm not allowed to use that one. I got to find something else.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. And one was stakeholders. Um, can I talk a little bit about the job descriptions, Marie? And
Yeah.
we were joking about that a little bit. So I'm moving more where I'm trying to get rid of this corporate speak altogether. And that's a goal of mine because it's tempting to go back to those familiar terms. They make us feel so comfortable. But I'm starting to say, I don't use stakeholders. I use, so if it's stakeholders, you're usually talking about different groups, your clients or colleagues. So say bringing together diverse colleagues and clients. I mean, that's what they are. That's the real thing. And Marie and I know a lot of the people who are attending right now also use job descriptions, and that is such a great tool. And one of the things that I also look for is, are they using those terms? And if they're using those terms, I tell clients, if they're not using those terms, you definitely do not want to use corporate speak because they're already ahead of that curve and they don't want to read a resume that's full of that.
Yeah. And you're talking about target job descriptions that the client would be targeting.
Yes.
And using those words or not using those words. Laura, I love this. Yes, it's hard to get people out of the third person, but telling them it looks antiquated might be a way to do that. And then Linda saying that who are the stakeholders? Let's get specific and clear. And I try to not to use etc. So just give the list. Yes, there's more things that could be in the list, but I just like a concrete, just give the list when we say and others or etc. It's just additional words that the person has to read that don't really add any value. Yeah. So the other thing I was going to just look at here quickly was this. So I had, I'd never really thought about it that much, but I had a client who called me to complain about the writer that he was working with. And he said, I'm in real estate sales and almost every 3 verbs on my resume is drove. I don't drive anything except for my car to sell real estate. And I realized that we use this verb a lot of times when it's really not what we mean and it's not helpful. So it's one of my things I watch for. If you grew sales, or you led the team to grow sales, if you're trying to use drove to show leadership, it's not really accomplishing your goal. And if you are the person that grew the sales, then it's more powerful to just say that you grew the sales. So that's one of those verbs that I watch out for there. And then you were talking about job descriptions. And I thought, let's go down to these job descriptions. Because this is what I see a lot is kind of the scope. This is what I was leading. This is some value, but kind of buried in a lot of lists. And this is Louise's beautiful transition here. This, just rewriting it to be very clear. And you've got the one, you still have some lists, but it's really clear in terms of what the value was quickly with the transform and getting that value out there faster.
Yeah, I like that.
And then, of course, this is when you really and I don't think this works in every situation, but when you're really writing for someone who's modern, or there was a talk this week about, do you need a 1-page resume in the Facebook group? And this is one of the ways you can get to that 1-page resume if someone wants a 1-page resume, even though they're more experienced, is cutting the job description all the way down to just the essentials.
Yeah. I like that. I use that a lot as well. It's a nice little snapshot at the beginning.
Yeah, and you could still even have another sentence if you had the space, but it just gets right to that. We were talking about earlier some of the job descriptions, and this is one of the befores and afters. Results-oriented sales leaders skilled at hiring, and then this one's recognized for So just a little bit different language, but then getting to the specifics, turned around sales, launched products, and penetrated new markets. So it's really just moving away from the generalities to the specific values. And as you said, kind of those buckets of value statements that are summary statements. They're not necessarily specific, but they're still focused on value delivered. So.
Right. And
Great.
you used it, did we talk about the bolding yet?
No, we didn't talk about the bolding. So this example has some random bolding in it. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, actually, no, so those are used very well. Yeah, so that is something that I noticed that sometimes clients or students feel that if they use bold, it's going to pack a lot more punch. But in reality, it's a lot harder because you have to make sure you're using them very strategically. So whenever I read a resume where somebody's used bold, there's always one core data point that's not bolded. And I'm thinking, why is that? Or there's a word that's not even related that is bolded. So I tend to not use them. I use them like Marie has used it here, just at the top. And then I use them, if I'm highlighting the title that way or something like that, but I don't use bold through the rest of the resume. Unless
I'll use it sometimes on the lead in, but then, every lead in has to be the same phrasing for that to work. And sometimes this kind of random bold works, but you do have to be careful about it, or it can be more distracting than it really is beneficial. And you were talking a little bit too about margins and that looking antiquated when we open up a document.
Yeah, so usually I can tell if I open a document and there's an inch around, I'm guaranteed that there's also going to be a double space after the period because that's kind of what we learned. I mean, that's what I learned. And so it's really, I go down to 0.6 around. And what happens is if you do that, then you find that you can use that, make up for that white space within the document, which makes it a lot easier to read. And I set my paragraph spacings. I don't use returns to have my spaces because you're not guaranteed that it's going to be the consistent size. But if you go in at the beginning and you set your spacing at 3 points, for example, the entire document will be at 3 points, and then you can modify that. So, for example, if you start a new company section and you want 6 points, you can do that there. But I think it's just more. That's a great separator for the bullets, I feel, visually. So you can go under a margin. You're allowed to do that now.
Yeah, and I try to live between 0.6 and 0.8, like 0.8 if I really need to, kind of fill the page. 0.6 as my lowest. I know some people go down to 0.5. I always had a printer that gave me errors if I was at 0.5. So I'm like, well, I don't want to cause that for anyone else. And it doesn't seem to make that much value to me. So I always go to 0.6. But it seems like a small thing. But oftentimes I'll tell people, well, then why fight it? If it's an easy way to look modern, 2 easy ways to look modern is to not use 1 inch margins and not stack your contact information at the top of the page. And sure, it's very superficial, but it's also a really easy way to make sure that we're looking at least a little bit more modern. So why not do it? Well, this has been fun. And I really enjoyed talking with you, Emily. And then just a last minute call. So our class starts on Thursday for the Academy Certified Resume Writer, and you can join in conversations like this with our peers on a quarterly basis once you are in the certification program. And of course, you get all of Emily's thoughtful feedback. And we also have 4 other graders that give feedback on the homework so that everyone gets a lot of value from the program.
Marie, I want to say thank you for having me. And thank you so much for, I know I'm speaking for everybody who's listening. Thank you for all you do for us. You know, all these classes, these little lessons and Facebook. I know it takes a lot of your time and we really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Thank you for coming and sharing what you're seeing. And we'll see you next week here on our Tuesday Trend Talk.
All right. Thanks, Marie.
Thank you.